The house felt colder that morning, even though the sun was out. Emily stood in the living room, where her father's photo rested on a table surrounded by flowers. It still didn't feel real that he was gone. Just a day after his funeral, her mother had called her and her sister Claire together. Emily had expected maybe a talk about memories or the will, but she never imagined what would come next. Her mother's words hit her harder than any slap could. "You'll never be as smart as your sister, so don't expect much." Then she turned to Claire, smiling, and handed her a set of keys, 7 houses worth of keys. "Your father left these to Claire," she said. "She'll know what to do with them." Emily couldn't move. She just stood there, holding her breath, trying to make sense of what she had heard. Her mother didn't even look at her, only added, "You'll get whatever's left." It was like being erased from her own family. She thought about all those nights she had spent taking care of her father when he was sick, the medications, the hospital trips, the sleepless hours sitting by his bed. Claire had barely visited, always too busy with her real estate clients. And now, somehow, she was the one rewarded for it. Emily didn't cry. She couldn't. She just nodded, turned away, and left the room. Claire followed her outside, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Don't take it personally," she said with a smirk. "Mom just knows I can handle things better. You've always been the soft one." Emily wanted to scream, but she didn't. There was no point arguing with people who had already decided her worth. She walked down the driveway to her car, clutching her jacket, feeling the wind sting her face. Inside, she whispered to herself, "Dad wouldn't have done this to me." But the papers seemed official, and her mother had spoken with such confidence that Emily started to doubt everything. Maybe her father really had thought she wasn't capable. Maybe her kindness and quiet nature had made her invisible in their eyes. That night, she sat alone in her small apartment. The walls felt closer than usual, and every sound from outside made her jump. She replayed her mother's voice again and again. "You're not smart." Those words burned. She looked at an old picture of her dad, the two of them fishing when she was little. He had always called her his steady one. She clung to that memory. Somewhere deep inside, she believed he wouldn't have left her with nothing. Still, the betrayal cut deep. Her mother had made her feel small for years, but this time, it wasn't just words, it was her whole life being dismissed. That night, Emily made herself a quiet promise. She didn't know how, but she would find the truth. And when she did, she wouldn't just take back what was hers. She'd make them regret ever calling her the weak one. The days after the will reading turned into long, empty weeks for Emily. She tried to focus on work at the hospital, but it was hard to keep her mind off how unfair everything felt. Every morning, she drove past one of her father's old houses, the one Claire now owned. There were construction workers outside, new paint going up, and expensive furniture being moved in. Claire stood there in her designer clothes, talking loudly to the contractors, calling the house one of Dad's smart investments. Emily stayed in her small, worn-out apartment and tried not to think about how different their lives had become. The only thing she got from her father's estate was a broken-down property on the edge of town. The roof leaked, the walls smelled of mold, and the neighbors told her it was almost marked for demolition. It was hard not to feel like the leftover her mother had said she was. Their mother, Linda, didn't make things easier. Every weekend she visited Claire, helping her decorate the new houses, bringing her homemade pies, and praising her on social media to the neighbors. "Claire's really doing something with her life," she would say proudly. When Emily called, Linda often let the phone ring or answered only to give short replies. "I'm busy, honey. Claire needs me right now," she would say before hanging up. The next time Emily saw them all together was at a family dinner. It was supposed to be a catch-up, but it felt more like a show. Claire arrived wearing a new gold watch and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "So, Em, how's that nursing job going?" she asked in a tone that made it sound like pity. Emily just nodded and said it was fine. Linda joined in, telling stories about how hard Claire worked managing the houses. "She's turning them into something beautiful," she said proudly. No one asked Emily about her job or her life. It was as if she was invisible at her own family table. Claire kept finding ways to make little jabs, commenting on Emily's simple dress, her old car, and even her short nails. "You should take a day off and get yourself pampered," she said with a fake smile. Emily kept quiet, forcing a polite laugh. She had learned that speaking up only made things worse. When dinner ended, Emily drove home in silence. The roads were dark, and the quiet hum of the car gave her time to think. She realized how much she had always been the shadow in her own family, the one who worked hard but never got noticed. It wasn't about the houses anymore. It was about how little they thought she mattered. As she parked outside her small apartment, she looked at her hands, tired, rough from work, and whispered to herself, "I'm not invisible." She didn't know how she would prove it yet, but something inside her had shifted. The anger that had been quietly growing was no longer just hurt. It was the start of something stronger. It had been a few months since the inheritance was divided, and Emily still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Her father had always been fair, always talked about treating both daughters equally. He might have been many things, but unfair wasn't one of them. The thought kept her awake at night. One weekend, she drove back to her childhood home. The house was quiet and smelled faintly of dust and old. Her mother was away visiting Claire again, which gave Emily a chance to be alone in the place that still held her father's memory. She walked through each room slowly, her fingers brushing against the worn furniture, the framed photos, the shelves full of books he loved. When she entered his old study, something inside her tightened. It was the one room her mother rarely entered, her father's private space. Papers were stacked neatly on the desk, and his favorite pen still lay beside them. Emily sat in his old chair and felt a wave of sadness wash over her. She remembered how he used to sit there, calling her his steady one. As she began dusting the drawers, she noticed one that wouldn't open. It was locked, and the small brass keyhole caught her eye. She looked around the room, searching for a key, and finally found a small tin box hidden behind some books on the shelf. Inside was a ring of old keys. Her hands trembled as she tried them one by one until the last one clicked. The drawer slid open, revealing a thin folder marked Will and Estate, Private Copy. Her heart began to pound. She pulled out the papers carefully and started reading. The date on the first page made her stop. It was written just a few weeks before her father passed away. The document clearly stated that his entire estate, including all properties, was to be divided equally between his two daughters, Emily and Claire. Every line confirmed what she had always believed. Her father wanted fairness. But that wasn't what had happened. Emily's hands shook as she turned each page. The signatures were clean, real, and properly witnessed. This was not the will her mother had shown. It dawned on her that someone had switched it, replaced it with a new version that favored Claire completely. She sat there in silence, her heart pounding so loud she could hear it in her ears. The truth hit her harder than anything before. Her mother and sister hadn't just lied, they had stolen from her. They had changed her father's dying wishes and made her look like someone too simple to handle money or responsibility. Tears filled her eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. There was no one to comfort her. The people she trusted most had betrayed her for greed. For years, she had blamed herself for not being smart enough. But now she knew the truth. It was never about her being unfit. It was about them wanting everything. That night, she locked the folder in her bag and walked out of the house with a steady heart. For the first time in months, she felt a strange kind of calm. She didn't know what her next step would be, but one thing was certain: she wasn't going to let them get away with this. Emily didn't sleep much that night. The image of her father's real will kept flashing in her mind. The betrayal stung, but anger wasn't going to fix anything. She knew if she acted out of emotion, her mother and Claire would twist the story and make her look foolish again. This time, she had to be smart, smarter than they ever believed she could be. The next morning, she made herself a promise. She wouldn't confront them right away. Instead, she would let them keep thinking she was the quiet, harmless one. That was her advantage. People who underestimate you never see it coming when you rise. Over the next few weeks, Emily started visiting Claire more often. She'd show up at her sister's houses, pretending to admire the renovations. "Wow, Claire, you've really done a great job here," she would say, smiling politely as Claire bragged about her success and how hard work pays off. Inside, Emily kept her emotions locked away. While Claire talked, Emily listened carefully. Every careless thing Claire said became a piece of information. She learned where the money was coming from, which properties were under Claire's name, and even overheard a few comments about how their mother helped sort out the paperwork after their father died. Emily nodded and acted impressed, while her mind quietly took note of every detail. Outside those visits, Emily began her real work. She reached out to a friend named Mark, who worked in real estate management. They had met years ago through the hospital where she worked, and he was someone she trusted. She didn't tell him everything at first, only that she was trying to understand some property transfers related to her father's estate. Mark agreed to help her look into the records. It didn't take long before small cracks appeared. Mark discovered that several houses had been transferred to Claire's name right after their father's death, far too quickly for normal legal processing. The documents carried both Claire's and Linda's signatures, but the witness names were fake. Emily began collecting copies of every suspicious file, organizing them in a folder she kept hidden under her bed. At home, she also started saving every message from her mother and sister. Any text that mentioned money, property, or even casual bragging went into a separate folder on her phone. She knew it might take months to build a strong case, but patience was something she had learned from years of nursing. Quiet strength, steady focus, that was her way. To everyone else, Emily looked the same, tired, quiet, maybe a little distant. But inside, she was planning carefully. She wasn't seeking quick revenge. She wanted justice that would stand and couldn't be denied. Each time Claire called her sweet, simple Emily, She smiled a little inside. They still thought she was powerless. They still thought she would do nothing. But Emily had already started writing the ending to their story, and this time it would be hers to tell. A few months passed, and Emily's plan was quietly taking shape. She didn't rush anything. Every move had to look ordinary, like something anyone in her position might do. That way, her mother and Claire wouldn't suspect what was coming. The first thing she did was put her small, rundown property up for sale. It wasn't worth much, but she didn't need it. People in the neighborhood whispered that she was giving up the only thing her father had left her. Claire laughed when she heard about it. Figures, she told their mother. Emily can't handle owning a house. Too much responsibility. Linda agreed, shaking her head like she was disappointed. Emily didn't respond. She let them think what they wanted. The sale went through, and she got a modest amount of money from it, not enough to change her life, but enough to take her next step. Instead of spending it, she quietly contacted a law firm in the city that handled estate fraud and forgery cases. Her first meeting with the lawyer, Mr. Carter, was nerve-wracking. She sat in his office, holding the old copy of her father's real will and the documents she had gathered over the past few months. He looked through them carefully, his face turning serious. "You've got something strong here," he said. "If what you're saying is true, this was a clear case of manipulation and document tampering." Those words gave Emily a kind of strength she hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time, someone believed her. She explained how her mother and sister had changed the will, how they took everything and left her with scraps. Mr. Carter promised to start an investigation, but warned her it could take time and money. Emily nodded. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. To cover the legal fees, she began working extra shifts at the hospital. Some nights, she barely slept. She'd work 12 hours, come home, and spend another few hours going through papers, making sure nothing was missed. It was exhausting, but she didn't complain. Every long night felt like one step closer to justice. Meanwhile, Claire and Linda went on with their lives as if nothing was wrong. They threw parties in their new houses, invited neighbors, and kept bragging about their success. Emily even attended one of the gatherings, just to keep up appearances. Claire joked about how poor Emily sold her only house, in front of everyone, pretending it was a harmless tease. Emily smiled and said nothing. Inside, she was calm. None of their words could touch her anymore. She had something much stronger: proof, patience, and purpose. When she drove home that night, she felt a small spark of satisfaction. Her first move was complete, and no one had noticed. While they were busy celebrating their stolen wealth, Emily was quietly building the case that would destroy everything they had taken. She wasn't rushing. She was just getting started. Weeks passed, and Emily kept her routine steady. She worked, saved, and stayed silent. To anyone watching, she looked like the same quiet woman trying to move on with her life. But behind the scenes, the investigation her lawyer had started was slowly uncovering the truth. Mr. Carter updated her regularly. Each call brought more shocking details. The documents Claire and Linda had used were full of errors once examined closely. The signatures on the final will didn't match her father's handwriting in other verified papers. The witnesses listed on it didn't even exist. They were completely made up. It became clear that the entire version shown during the inheritance process had been faked from start to finish. Then came the financial records. Mr. Carter's team traced several large transfers from her father's estate account to Claire's personal bank accounts, all done within days of his death. The timing was too perfect, too planned. Emily sat in silence as she listened to her lawyer explain everything. She felt angry, but mostly she felt sad. Her father's hard work had been stolen so quickly by the very people he trusted most. Mr. Carter reminded her to stay patient. "We can't move too early," he said. "Once we file, they'll fight back. We need every piece of proof lined up so they can't deny it." Emily agreed. It wasn't easy, but she understood. Justice had to be done properly. In the meantime, life around her mother and sister began to shift. Small whispers started spreading in town. A few people began questioning how Claire had managed to get all those properties so fast. Some even mentioned that the paperwork looked rushed. Linda, who loved her reputation, started feeling the pressure. She hated gossip, especially when it involved her name. One afternoon, Emily overheard two old neighbors talking at the grocery store. "You know, there's something strange about that will," one said. "Didn't the younger daughter take care of him when he was sick?" The other nodded. "Yeah, but somehow the older one ended up with everything. Doesn't sound right to me." Emily didn't say a word. She just smiled quietly and walked away. The truth was beginning to find its way to the surface without her saying anything. Linda called her a few days later, her voice sharp and nervous. "Emily, have you been talking to people about the will?" she asked. Emily replied calmly, "No, Mom." "Why would I?" Her mother hesitated, then hung up. Emily could tell she was worried, maybe even scared. Meanwhile, Claire acted like nothing was wrong. She was too busy flaunting her new car and posting pictures of her latest designer bags. Whenever people hinted at the rumors, she laughed them off and called them jealous. She had no idea that every purchase, every dollar spent, was being tracked. Emily stayed quiet, keeping her calm. She knew the walls were starting to crack, and soon, the truth would pour through. She didn't need to fight. The evidence was doing that for her. All she had to do was wait. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when Emily decided it was time. Months of waiting, collecting proof, and pretending not to know had led to this moment. She hadn't told her mother or Claire she was coming. She just showed up at the old family house with a folder under her arm and calm determination in her heart. The house looked the same as always, spotless, cold, and filled with memories that no longer felt warm. Linda was sitting on the couch, reading a magazine, while Claire was talking loudly on the phone. Both looked surprised when Emily walked in. "Emily, what are you doing here?" her mother asked, sounding uneasy. Emily didn't answer right away. She took a deep breath, walked to the center of the living room, and set her bag down on the coffee table. The room went quiet. Claire ended her call and crossed her arms, trying to look confident. "I know what you did," Emily said softly but firmly. Claire frowned. "What are you talking about?" Emily opened the folder and placed several papers on the table. Copies of the original will, financial statements, and printed emails from the lawyer's investigation. "Dad's real will," she said. "The one you both tried to hide." For a few seconds, no one spoke. Linda's face lost its color, and her hands began to tremble slightly. Claire glanced at the documents and then back at Emily, trying to keep her composure. "This doesn't prove anything," she said quickly. "You're confused." Emily looked her straight in the eyes. "No, Claire. I'm not confused. I've been patient but not blind. You forged Dad's will, and you both stole what wasn't yours." Her mother finally spoke, her voice weak. "Emily, you don't understand." "No, Mom," Emily interrupted. "I understand perfectly. You chose Claire. You lied, you signed false papers, and you made me believe Dad didn't love me enough to leave me anything. But he did. You just didn't want me to have it." Linda covered her face with her hand. Claire, still trying to act strong, said, "You can't prove any of this. You're wasting your time." At that moment, there was a knock on the door. Emily turned to open it. Mr. Carter, her lawyer, stepped inside, holding a set of official envelopes. "Actually," he said calmly, "we can prove it." He walked over and handed both Linda and Claire the legal papers, formal notices of the lawsuit and charges for estate fraud and forgery. Claire's confidence vanished. She dropped the papers onto the floor, her voice shaking as she said, "You can't do this." Emily looked at her sister, the same sister who used to laugh at her, and replied quietly, "I already did." The silence that followed was heavy. Years of humiliation and betrayal seemed to lift off Emily's shoulders in that one moment. She didn't yell, she didn't gloat. She just stood there, calm and certain. As she walked out of the house, she didn't look back. For the first time in her life, Emily felt free. The truth was finally on her side. The day of the court hearing finally arrived. Emily woke up early, her stomach tight with nerves. She dressed simply and neatly, wanting to look calm and respectful. As she walked into the courthouse with Mr. Carter beside her, she felt her heart pounding, but she kept her chin up. For months, she had waited for this moment, the day the truth would finally be heard. Inside the courtroom, Claire and Linda were already seated with their lawyer. Claire wore an expensive suit, her hair perfectly styled, trying to look confident. Linda avoided eye contact, her face pale and tired. Emily took her seat quietly, her folder of evidence resting in front of her. When the hearing began, Mr. Carter presented everything carefully. He showed the judge the original will, the forged one, the false witness names, and the bank transfers that traced money from the estate into Claire's personal accounts. The courtroom stayed silent as he laid out each piece of proof one by one. Even the judge looked surprised by how detailed and clear the evidence was. Then it was Claire's turn to speak. She stood and tried to sound calm, saying it was all a misunderstanding, that their father had changed his mind before his death, and that Emily was just bitter. But when the judge asked for proof, she had none. Her words started to stumble, and her confidence began to fade. Linda spoke next, her voice trembling. She claimed she only followed what Claire told her to do. She said she didn't mean to hurt Emily. The judge listened, but didn't seem convinced. Everyone could see it. The lies were falling apart. After hours of discussion, the judge finally looked over all the documents and took a long pause before speaking. "The court finds that the will was intentionally altered," he said firmly. "Emily Hart is entitled to half of her father's estate, as stated in the original document, along with additional damages for emotional distress." The words echoed through the courtroom. Emily sat still, barely able to breathe. She had dreamed of justice, but hearing it said out loud was overwhelming. Claire suddenly stood up, her face red with anger. "She's not even smart enough to pull this off," she shouted, pointing at Emily. You all think she figured this out? She's just lucky." The courtroom fell silent again. Emily turned her head and looked at her sister. Her expression was calm, her voice soft but steady. "Guess you were wrong about that too," she said. Claire's mouth fell open, but no words came out. Linda lowered her head, unable to look at either of them. When the session ended, Emily walked out of the courtroom into the afternoon sun. The air felt different, lighter, cleaner. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of their cruelty. Justice had finally been served. She didn't smile out of pride, but out of peace. Her father's wishes were honored at last, and that was all she had ever wanted. Months passed after the court case ended, and life slowly began to settle again. The legal process took time, but eventually, everything was transferred as the judge ordered. Emily finally received her rightful share, half of her father's properties, financial compensation, and the peace she had been chasing for so long. When she signed the final documents, she felt tears fill her eyes, not out of anger or pride, but out of relief. For years, she had been made to feel small and unworthy, but now the truth had proved otherwise. Her father's will was honored, and his words about fairness had finally come true. Claire's world, on the other hand, began to crumble. Once people learned about the fraud, her reputation as a real estate agent disappeared overnight. Clients stopped calling, and she lost her license. The same neighbors who once admired her now whispered about her lies. She tried to blame everyone else, her lawyer, her mother, even Emily, but no one believed her anymore. Linda didn't handle the shame well either. She sold her house quietly and moved to another town, away from everyone who knew what had happened. She never apologized directly to Emily, but she sent a short letter saying she hoped her daughter would find happiness. Emily read it once and put it away. The pain her mother caused wasn't something words could fix. Emily decided not to waste time on anger. She focused on rebuilding her life and honoring her father's memory. Among the properties she now owned, she chose one of his oldest homes, the one with the big porch and the apple tree in the yard. It was worn down but still carried a warm feeling she couldn't find anywhere else. She spent months fixing it up herself. Every wall she painted, and every nail she hammered made her feel closer to her father again. She filled the house with his old photos, his books, and the fishing rods they used when she was little. It wasn't about wealth anymore. It was about healing and remembering where she came from. Sometimes, she would sit on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea, listening to the wind move through the trees. The peace she felt then was something no amount of money could buy. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she had to prove herself to anyone. People in town began to see her differently too. They respected her calm strength and quiet courage. Some even came to her for advice, saying how proud her father would be if he could see her now. Emily always smiled softly at that. She believed he already knew. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers again, steady, honest, and peaceful. The noise and betrayal of the past had faded, leaving only the sound of a life rebuilt with patience, truth, and quiet strength. Emily's life slowly found a rhythm she had never known before. She no longer woke up with anger in her chest or sadness weighing her down. Instead, her mornings began with peace. A warm cup of coffee, sunlight on the porch, and the quiet comfort of knowing she had made it through the storm. She started volunteering at a hospice on weekends, a place where people came to find comfort in their final days. It reminded her of her father, his kindness, his patience, and the way he always believed in helping others. Emily cared for patients with the same gentle heart she once used to care for her dad. She held their hands, listened to their stories, and made them feel seen. Many of the nurses admired her calm nature, unaware of the pain and battles that had shaped her strength. Working there gave her life a new purpose. It wasn't about money, success, or proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about giving meaning to her days and honoring the lessons her father left behind, that kindness lasts longer than anger and love heals more deeply than revenge ever could. Sometimes, patients would open up about family problems, betrayals, or regrets, and Emily would just listen quietly. She didn't judge them or offer big advice. But once in a while, when someone needed hope, she'd share a little piece of her story, not the details but the message. She would say softly, "You can survive betrayal. You can lose everything and still find peace again. You don't have to fight loud battles to win your life back. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who rebuild in silence." Her words touched many hearts. Some of the younger nurses asked how she stayed so calm after all she'd gone through, and she'd smile and say, "Because peace is a choice. I stopped letting anger own me." One evening, she sat on her porch watching the sunset, thinking about how far she had come. The old wounds no longer hurt like they used to. The memories of betrayal had faded, replaced by gratitude for the strength she discovered within herself. She thought about her father and how proud he would be to see her living a life filled with compassion instead of bitterness. She whispered a quiet thank you to the sky, believing somehow he could hear her. That night, Emily wrote a few lines in her journal, something she hoped others would someday read and feel comforted by. If you've ever been told you're not smart enough, not good enough, or not worthy, don't waste your energy proving them wrong. Just build your own peace. That's the sweetest revenge. As she closed the journal and turned off the light, a soft smile crossed her face. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She was simply Emily, strong, free, and finally at peace, living a new beginning on her own terms.